Welcome to our CEO Insights sessions. We do 2 of these per month on the People Strategy podcast, and I cannot wait for you to join us this week as we chat with a CEO about key insights of how they've implemented a people strategy in their business. Join me in welcoming our guest for this week. This week, we have Bryan Wolff joining us as President of AllVoices. AllVoices is a leading employee relations platform, and Bryan really shares why AllVoices exists and what is the importance of bringing forward all voices in every conversation inside of our organization. Also, as a compliance perspective and as a people perspective, how do we tie those things together to ensure that we're serving and creating the business outcomes at the highest level? Bryan has previously been in operating roles with Thrive Market, Bonobos, Dog Vacay, and he also has spent some time as professional investor in both private and public markets. Bryan's background is a computer science degree from Princeton and an MBA from Stanford, and we're going to hear a little bit about how he has taken that background as a technologist into serving people. Bryan, it is so great to chat with you again today.
Traci, good to speak with you, Ken.
So we've been chatting a little bit about, the importance of all voices being heard in organizations. Thus, AllVoices is the organization that you're currently running. And I'm curious, why are you so passionate about employee voices being heard in organizations?
I've been involved in, startup and growth companies for over 10 years and, worked at a handful of other companies before that. And I've been in companies where I've really enjoyed coming to work every day and, felt a strong supporting environment. I've been in companies where that hasn't been the case. And when you don't enjoy coming to work or when you feel either intimidated or just aren't satisfied, it really stinks. It's a terrible experience. I mean, we spend, I think, more than half of our waking hours at work and working, and most people really care about what they do. And to have that environment be safe and tolerable, worst case, but hopefully it's one where people can thrive. And if people don't have the ability to speak up and have their voices be heard so that they can empower change, I don't think you can have that environment.
Right. And I want to dig in. You said, tolerable at worst case. And at best case, it's what I say is valued and encouraged. And that creativity drives some of that innovation and impact in what we're doing.
Right. I mean, no one should be harassed at work. No one should be intimidated. No one should be based upon their gender or religion or sexual orientation or et cetera, should be made to feel anything other than their true self. So that's sort of the baseline, I think. But really, people want to be empowered, right? And people want to speak up and be heard. And most people I found, and we found at the company, are really well-intended. And, there's an issue at the company, and most people want it solved, or at least want to make sure that the people who are in charge of the company are aware of that issue. But oftentimes, because of fear of retaliation or power dynamics or challenges with getting feedback to the right people, those issues aren't even able to be raised. And if they're not raised, of course they can't get, satisfied and fixed.
Yeah. And what I love about this is that there is an and both of what's needed, both from leadership, from the team itself, and from the individual. And so we have an obligation almost of a 360-degree view of sharing what is important and what can move things forward so that it's done together versus us versus them.
I totally agree. And I think progressive organizations and forward-looking organizations take that attitude and have adopted that attitude. And our tool, one of the real benefits of it, and if you talk to our customers, one of the reasons why they love it is that it gives employees a voice and then allows for companies, for the teams to easily manage those conversations in a way that it can lead towards constructive outcomes and issues being not just raised, but also addressed.
I really want to hear, and I think our listeners really want to hear, what's happening inside of AllVoices from how you're leading within ensuring inside of All Voices that those issues, concerns, ideas, questions, innovations are shared. So I think that there's times where there's a specific incident for you that you had to say yes to leading from this vision of all voices being heard. So I'm curious, what was that for you?
Our, mission is to foster healthy workplaces by empowering employees to speak up and be heard. Our team knows that. We live it. So for us, feedback is just part of our culture, and making sure issues are sort of raised and addressed is imbued in sort of who we are. We get way more feedback than is typical, which is great. Partly, I think, again, because of the nature of the business we're in, and partly because we are, very transparent and open and desirous of that feedback. And so for us, the culture you can feel it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you raise a really great point is there's a key distinction as organizations grow. So an organization at 30 employees versus 100 employees versus 1,000 or 5,000 or 50,000, there's key distinctions and milestones within that. And most of our audience is startups or really growing into that. And I know that as All Voices was founded by Claire and as you stepped in, those first 10 employees have a significant impact on the culture. Do you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been fortunate enough to have worked at, I think, 5 different startups and have invested in and advised and been on the board of, a dozen or so more. And I'm a big believer, and I didn't make this up, but someone told me this, and I sort of take the best things I can, share them, is that the culture gets set by your first, 5 to 10 employees and never changes. And I found that to be the case at other companies I've worked at. What I think good growth companies do is find ways to have that culture be a positive supporting force in terms of people who they bring into the organization, people who get promoted and are celebrated within the organization, and then people who exit the organization. And it's a challenge to do, I think, and especially as you're scaling, and especially as you're, scaling really quickly, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are, of how to think about how to make sure that that culture doesn't get lost. And it's funny. I'm sure a lot of your listeners and your founders have experienced this. When you start a company, it's just you and maybe a few other people, right? Sometimes just you. And there's a real awareness that the company exists, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, it was just the PowerPoint presentation, right? And now, like, all of a sudden we're doing stuff and we're selling a product and revenue's coming in. And then, fast forward a couple of years and people join a company and assume a level of stability that you as a founder or as a founding team don't necessarily appreciate. Because you remember when this was like, oh my God, we're trying to make payroll every week and like trying to get around to funding to allow us to grow. And now all of a sudden people come and there's systems and there's processes and like, there's an office and like it feels like a real company. And how do you keep the same culture you had when you were only sort of a handful of people? And now, you're at 100 people or 150, or once you break beyond that barrier and you're at a point where not everyone knows each other, or you have people in different locations. And that becomes a real challenge, and one in which that, I've sort of faced at a few different companies in the past. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners are facing as well.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about that is there's intentional cultural changes that we want to have change as organizations grow. And there's, I think, a distinction between what we want, an organization that's like a family versus an organization that's truly a team working together. There's a key distinction there, and there's lots of different things that go into that. But it's choosing what that culture is. And then, we look at culture and say, culture is the behaviors that you allow or don't allow day in and day out. So how do we allow those, to change and to evolve and those behaviors? So I'm curious, based on your experience and what's currently happening at All Voices, how are you aligning those things?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it a different way, which is culture is what people do when no one's looking, right?
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
Yeah. So for us, listen, I'm a big believer in your workplace team is a team and not a family, right? You can't leave your family your family, or you love unconditionally, right? Your family is you're born into, or marry into, and that's for life. Companies are teams, and I really try to preach that approach because teams are involved the players, and you have to bring your best self. And also, teams have different roles. If you use a sports team analogy, depending on the sport, not everyone holds the ball all the time, and not everyone is on the field all the time, and not everyone is the person who is making all the decisions, right? There are different types of functions within different teams. And also, as teams evolve and as teams grow, sometimes certain players, no longer become a good fit, right? And that at growth companies is especially challenging. And one of the things that I think good companies do really well is how to make sure that you allow your people to grow with you. But if there are instances where the company outgrows a person and a person is no longer a good fit, make sure that person is is celebrated, and you're gracious and thoughtful and help that person find the next role. So getting back to AllVoices, Traci, one of the structural changes we've made of the last 18 months is we've moved a little bit more from a SMB customer to more of a mid-market and enterprise customer. We're still solving the same problem of creating healthy workplaces, but what we realized is that the employee relations professional who is responding to all those workplace inquiries, she or he is overworked, overwhelmed, and needs more tools to help them do their job. And so that's just caused us to move up market a little bit. And that shift has created a different set of skills that are required for different people in the organization. And so we've had to make some adjustments to properly set our company up for success, given the direction that we're headed. And that has involved a little bit of turnover. And I think doing that in the right way helps build culture. And one of the things I'm really, really proud of is back in 2022. We had to do a layoff, right? This was, pretty common when the cost of capital started going up. We had to adjust our business to the reality, and did a RIF and laid off a number of employees. We've since rehired 2 of those employees because basically, we said, hey, listen, we're really sorry. We love you. This is not personal. This is just an adjustment of what we need to do. And as we've now been growing again, off of a smaller base of employees, we've reached back out and kept good relationships and had roles that made sense for those individuals, and those individuals were excited to come back. So it's something that I'm really proud of in terms of us treating people the right way and still being true to our mission.
Amazing. And you said something really interesting that I want to kind of circle back to, which is allow people to grow with you. And then there's times where the organization's moving along further and an employee's not necessarily moving along. So you shared kind of how you've done a business shift within AllVoices at this point in time to a different type of customer. So how did that actually change the growth trajectory for some of your team, and how did you give them that opportunity to step into it or potentially choose to step out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way I approach it is looking at the skills that are needed organizationally, right? And saying, hey, based upon our goals and what we are looking to achieve this year, or the next, 2 to 3 years, here are the skills that we need at the organization. And in doing that, we identified some gaps. And I had frank conversations with people and said, hey, there's a skill gap here. And we have to address that gap. And because we're a small company, and just because we're pretty entrepreneurial in nature, I am very flexible with how we think about addressing that gap, right? We can bring in a part-time employee. We can have a fractional person. We can get an advisor. You can have someone who provides on-demand services, right? There's different ways now, I think more so than ever, where you can fill those gaps, bring needed expertise into the company in a way that allows you to be pretty agile and adjust, the company's composition and its ability to address its business needs. And in some cases, individuals have responded really positively and have to be honest, oftentimes it comes down to self-awareness. certain employees who are really self-aware and take the feedback and recognize that, oh, wow, this is a real growth opportunity, but this is also something that I can't do alone, will get that support and be able to really thrive in that environment. And in other instances, that becomes more of a challenge. And it becomes too much of a challenge. In some cases, they're no longer as a good fit, and you have to make a team adjustment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that self-awareness. And I think another piece, and I'd love you to chat a little bit about this, is organizational awareness. There's times where folks cannot shift into a role, but there's also times, especially in startups, where the organization is pulling and trying so many different things that the organizational awareness is, we might have just set this person up to fail by the way we were leading them or the structure that we put in place. And when is it the employee? When is it the organization? And how to really step back and go, okay, it might be a little bit of both, or it might be one or the other, but how do we also self-reflect as a leader and on the employees? So again, we have that two-way story.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And listen, I take this responsibility. I don't take it lightly as a leader. And it's something I try to coach the other leaders at the team, that you as a leader are responsible for the people who work for you being successful. It's literally your job, right? Your job is to make them successful. And if someone is not succeeding in the role, you are failing. And that's either because they don't have the skills, they don't have the training, or they don't have the, either motivation or understanding of the job that they need to do. So identify what's the issue, and then correct the issue. And if it's uncorrectable because of the individual, either the skill gap is too wide, or the individual doesn't have the self-awareness or the desire for correction, then you have to make a change. But the first thing to do is hey, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. Let's be transparent with our feedback, and let's be thoughtful about how we coach someone. And again, it's your job as a leader to make sure your team is thriving. And if it's not, then you need to fix it.
And in our conversation, you said something so powerful, and that was something to the effect, I'm going to say it wrong, so you're going to need to correct me, but what is the real job of a manager? It's not to manage.
No, it's to get out of the way. And the thing I preach all the time to my direct reports is, your job is not to make me happy. Your job is to win, right? Your job is to be successful in your role in a way that makes the company more successful, not making me happy. And if I'm wrong, which I'm wrong a lot, or I don't understand something, which happens a lot, you need to tell me, right? And you need to explain why this is the case. And if there's something that's unpopular, but it's the right thing to do, you need to do it. And then you need to explain to the team and build consensus for why that's the right course of action. So that, again, I'm a passionate believer in that and try to encourage that. But the implications as a manager, I think, are really profound, because it's, you really think about yourself as an enabler, right? It's how do I help this person be successful? And for me, I really, beyond having someone be successful in the role, I love nothing more. And this is why I love growth companies. They enable people to accelerate their careers, right? So before I'm in this role, I was the CFO of a number of organizations. And one of the things I'm really proud of is 7 people who I hired into a role junior to me, later in their careers went on to be CFOs.
Amazing.
Amazing. And, I try to, with everyone who I hire and everyone who reports to me, have a real clear understanding of what is your desired career trajectory and what can we do to help you.
And I want to shift this now a little bit into AllVoices, really meant for much, much larger organizations than 30 people. And yet, as we're chatting here, it's hey, we're seeing different things from the lens of where we sit, but we don't always see it from the lens of the employee view. And bringing those things forward is much easier in a smaller organization typically than a larger organization. And so as we shift into, hey, I am on the receiving end as a HR practitioner in an organization, and I'm subscribed to AllVoices. I'm getting these reports where employees are sharing items, and AllVoices is giving me what?
Yeah. So our ideal customer is much larger and has a person who's dedicated for a majority, if not all, of his or her time or team's times to managing employee relation issues. A great tool for anyone who wants to improve their employees' experience, because we're the easiest and best way for employees to give anonymous and real feedback, and for the HR practitioners to be able to respond easily and equitably to that feedback.
And one of the things, Bryan, we talked about earlier that I think was so great is not only are you providing the feedback, but so often, like if you come to me and say, hey, Traci, you did this XYZ, I take it so incredibly personally, right? We do, we're human. Versus, hey, here's a trend that we've got and we're seeing 2, 3, 4 of these things. And we're going to start to provide you using some AI tools, using what we see from all of the data that we get. Here's some potential opportunities for you to solve those items. Because so often we get bogged down that we don't have the brain power to go, I need to go do 3, 4, 5, 6 based on what's in my policy and based on what's here.
Totally. And this is why we do have a lot of small customers. They don't use the product every day necessarily because they don't have, smaller companies don't have as many incidents as bigger companies, but having it in a system and not in email and not in, a Google Doc or some Word or worksheet, one, allows you to identify trends. And two, allows you to identify root causes that you wouldn't otherwise identify. And having things all in one place, regardless of employee turnover and regardless of who may be managing those issues, it is absolutely paramount. And we have an AI tool that analyzes your data and will look for those trends in a way that's actually quite cool. And we've designed the tool to make it easy for reporting, for reporters and for admins to put data into the system in a way that actually allows everything to be captured so you don't miss any of those trends. Because for smaller companies, the way in which they manage employee relations is like email and Slack and, all the other workplace tools. But people leave and you aren't thinking about things all the time. And you miss the fact that, hey, this is the third incident in 6 months that's
Right.
occurred in this department. We should probably figure out what's going on, right? Or this is the fourth time that this one individual has been targeted. But, if 2 different people are handling that and the person has changed managers and stuff gets missed, even at a small company. So, that's why, for everyone, I think you should use a dedicated tool. And we do have a good solution for, small and medium businesses, one that's been incredibly valuable to us as well. One of the other benefits, and we talked a lot about, improving employee engagement, giving people a voice. There's also a real risk mitigation of having stuff documented in a way that if an employee leaves and makes a claim against the organization, but you have his or her behavior documented, it's a lot easier to defend yourself. And that's one of the benefits that a lot of our customers talk about as well.
I am so grateful for Bryan and the passion that he brings into ensuring folks can truly be heard in everything that they're doing and that origin story of all voices. So my 3 takeaways from today are: culture is what you do when no one's looking, and verse. Culture is the behaviors that you allow and don't allow in your organization. So that insight of, 2 competing ideas or 2 competing priorities. And here's the action that I really want you to think about. And that is, as leaders in an organization, you have an obligation to create that culture. And that culture is absolutely happening when no one's looking. And the culture is happening by what we allow. And so how are you meaning the universal you, but it's also the personal you, because it's an and both within that. So how are we allowing those cultures and creating that culture to get to our business outcomes? And sometimes that's incredibly intrinsic as far as what are those things that are important inside of the organization? Is it that we work as a team and that it truly is a we, or is it that it's individual contributors are moving things along and how we do that? And that creates those business results of, do we need that one person that's out driving all these where we have a number of followers, or do we do this collaboratively as a team to move and make those key impacts? So the second insight is allow people to grow with you. That allowing folks to grow with you, the action is, how are you mentoring and supporting your staff as you're growing in your organization? And how are you having those conversations about when it's time to separate ways and what that looks like? And that's both for staff, that is for different team members coming and going. And, what I love about what Bryan said is there's many different ways that we can set up our team. It could be part-time, it could be an advisor, it could be a consultant, it could be a full-time team member. So however that is, ensuring you're allowing folks to grow, but there's clarity of expectations around what that is. That way, those business results are being hit, but also personal goals for themselves are being hit so that you're aligning with what they want and need along with the organization wants and needs. And then the third insight from today was self-awareness and organizational awareness. Where are we at as an organization? How are we setting our team up to be successful? Do we have clarity in what we're doing? And are we leading in key ways that allow us individuals to grow? Back to point two. And for our team members, are they aware of how they're showing up and impacting inside of the organization as well? Because when we have the self-awareness and the organizational awareness, we can say, yep, we are 100% aligned of what we're doing in order to get these results, or no, we're starting to have some friction, and those unintended consequences of that friction can actually lead us to greater results. With that, thank you so much for joining us on the People Strategy Podcast, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Traci, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.